Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Climate Confident podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Elizabeth. Elizabeth, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I very much am delighted to be here, Tom. Thank you so much for inviting me. I am Elizabeth Thompson, and I am currently serving as the director of a new initiative called Visions 2030.
Okay, superb. And before we get into what Visions 2030 is, can you give us a little bit about your kind of origin story? How did you get there?
Sure. Let's see, I guess I'll start at the beginning of my professional career. I've really been interested and involved in, the role that the arts, human creativity, technology, innovation play in shifting culture. And I started my career in the experimental theater and contemporary art world. In the 1990s, I got very interested in sort of big picture ideas about cultural evolution and emerging technologies. The internet, everything was sort of exploding at that time. I was living in the Bay
Mm,
Area and started a nonprofit called Planet Work with some colleagues, and we were looking at, how might we be able to harness the global reach of the web and this new thing called social networks and the real burgeoning understanding of the global ecological crises. And we sort of posited that there could be a meaningful connection between the two. And we were interested in how we could harness people as a kind of force for good and for global change. From there, I went to the Buckminster Fuller Institute, served there as the director for 15 years. And that was really the context of the Buckminster Fuller Institute is the visionary imagination of Buckminster Fuller.
yeah.
So, and he challenged the way people thought about the earth, our role as individuals, our creative capacities, our role as stewards. He used to talk about, he used this analogy that we are on a spaceship called Earth,
Mm,
hurtling through the galaxy at 64,000 miles an hour, and we are all its astronauts and its stewards, and we have the capacity to steer things in positive directions. So we did a lot of things while I was there, but one of them was to really focus on the solutions that are out there and the people creating sort of systems based solutions to some of our biggest issues. And we started something called the Buckminster Fuller Challenge, which was an annual design competition that we were very proud to have it eventually be known as Socially Responsible Design's highest award.
nice.
And we ran that program for about 10 years. And so from there, I had sort of felt complete with my work there and was living in New York and working for a number of different nonprofits in all in the kind of nexus of sustainability, education, culture, et cetera. And then I met Carrie Lovelace, who was starting this initiative, who had already started actually, Visions 2030. So that's how
Okay.
I
And
sort
what
of started
and
here.
what is it?
So it's a new initiative. It's based in New York. It's a nonprofit creative studio. It's dedicated to harnessing the artistic imagination to create new perspectives, focus on the solutions to create a better future. So, Carrie Lovelace is a visionary producer. She's a playwright, a an art critic, has done many interesting things in her career, and she was interested in, gathering a group of people whose careers touched on this intersection of sustainability, global change, the arts, technology, to sort of come together and create new platforms to counteract the kind of prevailing doom based culture of critique and despair. This was high Trump 2019. We're hoping we're not going to go back there. And she was really all about, the imagination, the artistic imagination, and how we need to create experiences and platforms for more people to tap into that wellspring to help us move forward in positive directions. We talked a lot when she called me about the reality that the collective human imagination is like the greatest untapped resource of our time. This is really a power that needs to be better harnessed, and everybody has the capacity to dream forward, to imagine a better future. It's an innate human capacity. Everyone can do it, no matter who they are, no matter their experience. Many people experience barriers to be able to really tap deeply into their imagination, but that the capacity is there in all human beings. At least that's the premise of Visions 2030. So
Okay. And to what end? What's the end game or end goal? Why is it important for people to have that kind of positive imagination?
really, ultimately, it's to get involved in both the collective search for solutions, in the need to put pressure on people at the highest levels of decision making about what we really want for the future, to be educated and informed about the great positive work that's going on out there, to invite and encourage people to be agents of their own, in their own lives, in their own communities of positive change. So we offer all kinds of different entry points for people to just begin to get inspired about what's possible, both within their own selves and in their communities, out in the larger world. We offer workshops. We have an incubator program where we provide resources for people to take a kind of, what Carrie likes to say, sort of a wild and crazy idea about, for a solution to a big problem, and we incubate it. We provide financial resources and other kinds of resources to take the idea to the next level, toward the possibility of it being implemented in the world. We hold public conversations. We've produced big festivals, etc. So all within this sort of context of bringing together people from the arts, from the scientific community, thought leaders, people from the technology world, etc.
Okay. And how do you, maybe you can't, but how do you measure success in something like this?
Well, I think we spoke about this before. We're in the business of sort of changing hearts and minds, and it's the data points on that are difficult to collect. But as a kind of cultural intervention, we are trying to shift people's attitudes and perceptions through experiences and exposure to new ideas, and to experiments in opening the imagination and envisioning a better future. So we have taken polls of people before and after some of these installations and experiences that we've created, and we've seen a measurable difference in people's attitudes. And our hope is that they then bring that newfound optimism or renewed optimism about the future into their lives, into their communities, and start being part of the solution.
Okay. And part of the Visions 2030 is something called the Lumisphere experience. Could you
Yeah.
describe for people what that is and how it is going to counter kind of the climate doom loop?
Absolutely. So, this project was very much born out of what I've just been talking about, this desire to help shift people from a kind of state of shutdown and despair. Climate anxiety is a huge issue, very pervasive state of many people today. And this project was created to try to offer an antidote to that climate anxiety and the shutdown and despair that accompanies that, and give people an experience that may help shift them to a more positive perspective about the future. Technically speaking, the Lumisphere is a 3 dome installation. Its footprint is about 6,500 square feet. It's a large scale installation. It takes people on a kind of journey of the imagination through these three spheres. It starts with a sort of orientation kind of digital earth campfire, which sort of situates us on the earth in the world and begins to address the fear and anxiety that people are feeling. People then move into a second environment where they are taken on sort of a spectacular, immersive, awe-inspiring audio visual journey into sort of what we call the heart of their imaginations. And we ask people what they want for their own future and ask them to begin to imagine what that future might look like. They then move into a third space where, through bespoke AI technology, they are invited to create a visual rendering of the future that they want to see. They're given a bunch of prompts. An image is then rendered, which they then see on large screens, sort of a gallery installation in that third dome. And then from there, they are invited into what we're calling sort of a mentoring zone, where they are met by trained facilitators who help them sort of unpack their experience, talk about what it is that they see and want for the future, and how they might be able to get involved in local initiatives that are taking some piece of that vision and already doing something about it in their own communities. So it's we like to say it's sort of, we're doing three things with the Lumisphere. We're the first realm is about awakening the spirit, the imagination. Then we're asking people to sort of activate upon their vision for the future, and we give them tools and resources to do so. And then people have the opportunity to amplify their vision through social media, et cetera, because they are given an artifact, the image that they have rendered through a social media platform, which they can share out to the world. So
Okay,
if
and
people want to sort of, just, that was a complicated explanation. It's very difficult to explain it. If people want to check it out, if this seems interesting, they can go to the Visions 2030 website, which is visions2030.studio, and find the tab for the Lumisphere. And there's a beautiful, we call it the sort of sizzle reel, which is a short piece, 2 minutes, that takes you through the journey.
nice, nice. And what have the reactions from people who've experienced it been like? Do you have any, memorable stories or feedback that you can share?
Well, first of all, the experience of awe is an important kind of catalyst for people to kind of shake themselves out of their current state,
Mm.
and helps people kind of consider something new. If you've had a kind of awe-inspiring experience, that's documented in the social sciences. So people have feedback is that they were awe-inspired, that for many people, being asked what they want for the future is both a novel experience, which is sort of interesting. There are not very many spaces, at least in the United States, where, if you're just an average citizen, where you can go and be asked, what do you want for the future? And to talk to other people about what they want for the future. And so and when you ask people that question, you're really inviting them to be quite vulnerable, actually. And so we've
Sure.
created a very safe space for people, we hope, to feel open to really asking themselves, well, what do I want for the future? What what does that look like? And that experience, for many people, in and of itself, has been moving and catalytic in some way for them to begin to imagine that perhaps they could get involved in their community to change things in positive ways. So,
Nice.
I mean, I spent so much of my life with people for whom, imagining great possibilities is just second nature. And I forget, and I feel like many of us forget that for average people, that's not something that they spend a lot of time doing. And we need everybody now to be part of a kind of army of the willing to, have something in their own minds that we're moving toward, because that also is a motivating state of mind. And we need more and more people involved in both thinking about positive solutions, but importantly, agitating and for our elected officials and others in positions of leadership to make good decisions and do what needs to be done to change things quickly.
Sure, 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 sure. No, that makes sense. And can you tell us a bit about the Earth Optimism movement and how it aligns with the goals of Vision 2030?
So, Earth Optimism, maybe some of your listeners aren't familiar with it. It's a relatively new movement that sort of started in the conservation space, but it's really ultimately about promoting a more positive outlook for the future. I think I've just been talking about this, but there's sort of a growing recognition that we need to shift public perception towards things that are working. And there are
Hmm.
many, many, many solutions out there to combat climate change. And the Earth Optimism movement is about shifting people to really understand that we do have an option for success. This is something that Fuller used to talk about all the time. You don't have to be optimistic. He called himself an optionist. And from that perspective, when you understand the data, of both what the trends in technology and human intelligence, et cetera, are telling us, and you do your research about all the solutions out there, you can really, you really understand that we do have the option to make it. This isn't some pie in the sky dream. It's the possibility is here right now. So the Earth Optimism movement is, taking its cues from people like Fuller and others.
And if people want to know more about it, where can they go to learn about the Earth Optimism movement?
Just Google it or use your whatever search engine you need. I think I, I believe there's a URL called earthoptimism.org, but
Google's
yeah,
fine.
you
Yeah.
just Google it.
Sure, sure, sure.
Yeah.
We've seen climate change themes pop up in various TV shows and movies recently, like in Don't Look Up and to a lesser extent, I guess, Avatar. How do you think pop culture can influence public perception and action on climate issues?
I think it has a huge role to play.
Mhm.
I think that the more narratives, storytelling is the way in which we all, well, in the way in which culture evolves. And I think the movie and television industries have a really important role to play. And I think the integration of climate stories that are, we have doom scenarios, but I think, the more stories that can be told, both in a kind of fiction context as well as the news and other outlets where we hear stories about innovation, people who are doing interesting things in their communities and in the larger world, and the actual solutions, the better. So, pop culture is a huge force for positive change.
Sure, sure. Many artists and celebrities are using their platforms to advocate for climate action. Are there any
Yeah,
particular artists or cultural figures that you think are doing an exceptional job at raising awareness and inspiring change?
gosh, I'm going to get back to you on that one. I mean, there are, there's too many ideas going in my head, and I'm drawing a blank. But yeah, I'll
No worries. No worries.
circle back on
Let,
the
let,
answer to that
let, let me let
question.
me th- let me throw a different one at you then. So If you could collaborate with any artist, living or dead, to create a project for Visions 2030, who would it be and what would that project look like?
So now I can answer your previous question. So Brian Eno has launched a new project, and the name of it, I believe, is called Hard Art. And have you heard of this?
I have not.
It's so he is based in the UK, is has created sort of a new interdisciplinary studio of artists and other sort of activists to again from within the cultural sector, create experiences and other kinds of, I think he's probably created a web platform, no doubt an album, to do something very similar to Visions 2030, which is to, engage more and more people in a
Hmm.
more proactive, optimistic framework about the big issues of our time. And, it would be a dream to collaborate with Brian Eno and to participate in his hard art movement. And he's talking about the idea that the planet itself is a work of art, which is
Right.
something that a number of different artists and thinkers, from Joseph Beuys to Buckminster Fuller, have talked about. The planet as a work of art, our role as individuals as that of an artist, um, because we need to tap into that level of our human capacity for creativity and innovation to create the world that we want. And so he's right now he did, Brian Eno, that is galvanizing the artistic community to get involved in these issues, and I'm really fascinated to see what he's going to do.
Brilliant. Brilliant. That's fantastic to hear. Um, and when we talk about inspiring people, how can we better inspire and engage young people in the fight against climate change? Have you seen any cool projects or initiatives that, in that case, are being particularly effective?
Well, there's a young climate psychologist. And we haven't really dug into the sort of eco anxiety realm, but just to say, if people are interested in that concept, and I'll get to answer your question in a second, but
Sure.
if the people are interested in that concept, it really sort of emerged in the early 1990s and was really championed by a British psychologist called Rosemary Randall. And she created something called the Climate Psychology Alliance. And there are a number of US based social scientists and psychologists, just among the many is a friend and colleague, Renee Lertzman, a brilliant psychologist named Leslie Davenport, and this young woman, to answer your question, named Britt Ray. And she has written a book called Generation Dread and has a blog and a podcast, I believe, called Gen Dread. And
Hmm.
so she is really absolutely focused on her generation of young people and helping, both acknowledging the kind of overwhelming sense of a burden about the future that young people have. It's not just climate, it's our social justice issues, the economic issues. These are all interrelated, as I don't have to tell you this,
Hmm.
but her work is deeply inspiring because she's starting with a conversation about the felt reality that young people have for, being responsible for this future that they didn't create, that they're going to have to fix and change. And she uses a framework of joy and possibility, and is very much connected to musicians and artists who are also trying to bring joy into the mix here, and a kind of positive outlook focused on solutions. So I highly recommend that people check out Britt Ray's work and the other people that I mentioned. It's really powerful stuff.
Cool. That sounds great. I'll definitely be checking that out myself.
Yeah.
Looking forward, what are the next big steps for Visions 2030? Are they 2030? Are there any upcoming projects or events that, you'd like people to be aware of?
Well, we are a couple things. One, with the Lumisphere, we are in the process of developing a 5-year tour of that project and in conversation with museums and cultural institutions around the world to bring the Lumisphere to their sites, as well as some sort of big global gatherings like COP, World Expos, the Olympics. These are all conversations that we're in the midst of having, as well as with the supporters and partners who will help us get there. And with Visions 2030 writ large, we're in the process of developing some programming around Climate Week in New York City in September, and are developing some new workshops that we're calling collective dreaming to, again, engage people at a smaller scale in this kind of active dreaming about the future that they want. So those will be workshops that will be available in person in New York and elsewhere, alongside our big ambitions to scale the Lumisphere project.
Okay. And what happens to the Visions 2030 brand when we get to 2031?
When it sunsets, it will be rebranded. But I mean, obviously, the urgency around the sustainable development goals put forth by the UN is front of mind. And, our work right now is to, really focus on playing some role, small as it might be, in helping to engage more people in the very urgent need to get involved in climate solutions and educate themselves, advocate for visionary ideas, understand what they want for the future so that they can become an active agent in their own lives and in their communities.
Okay. Looking back over all of the fascinating projects you've been involved in, what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned about driving systemic change?
I think education is so fundamental to making anything at a big scale happen. You need, I mean, this is such a cliche, but you need to have as many people as possible educated about the realities of now and the possibilities for the future so that they can ask for and put pressure on those who are leading us to do the hard work of looking at the fundamental problems at the heart of many of our systems. I'm not answering your question very succinctly or clearly, but we need to transform our educational systems and the way in which we talk about and look at the big issues driving our world today. Systemic change starts from the capacity to understand we are part of a global system, that
Mm,
all of these issues are interrelated, and you need to be able to see that in a way that connects the dots so that you can begin to imagine solutions that don't create problems down the road, that are anticipatory and comprehensive.
it's a tough question. Systemic change is, by definition, challenging. So, yeah, cool.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Enough said. I don't know what else to say about it, but
Elizabeth, talking about people's imagination and the need to be optimistic, if we look at works of fiction generally, a lot of fiction books looking into the future tend to paint a dystopic
hmm
future rather than a
hmm
utopic future.
hmm
Why do you think that is? And is that something that we can change? Can we get people to be more optimistic in their outlook on the future?
I would start by looking at who's writing science fiction novels. It's a I mean, not all science fiction is dystopic, but a lot of it is, and it's
Mm,
I can't give a history lesson in the origins of science fiction literature, but it's born out of, from my understanding, a kind of pervasive anxiety about the future technology. It's from starting with Frankenstein and and other science fiction novels, it's an expression of an anxiety about technology, the future, and the kind of growing industrialization in the West. I mean, I think that
Mm.
is that's not that's a perspective that's not new at all. I think it's primarily written by men, and but there are writers who are tackling the future from a kind of sci-fi perspective. I'm sure, have you interviewed the author of the Ministry of the Future?
Ken Stanley Robinson.
Yes, Ken Stanley Robinson is a perfect example of someone who's trying through that medium to both address the anxiety and also express ideas about a deeper connection to the earth, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if I'm answering your question to your satisfaction, but
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. I guess it's kind of like the difference between Star Wars and Star Trek, isn't it? Because Star Wars is the one where you have an empire with an evil emperor, and Star Trek is where you have kind of a more utopian future.
right. Yeah, that's a very good comparison. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And what what is in the psyche and the soul of the the writers of those two epics. Yeah, they're that's those are outputs from the imaginations of those writers, right? They're
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. We're coming towards the end of the podcast now, Elizabeth. Is there
Hmm.
any question I haven't asked that you wish I had, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to think about?
I just think that it's incumbent upon all of us at this very precarious moment to learn about the positive work that's being done and help others understand that there is a lot of work that's been done. We can dare to be hopeful about the future because we have these options, and that yes, it looks like we're not going to make it but at times, but it's really going to require more and more of us to say no. We can thread this needle, and I'm going to be a part of it, and I'm going to do whatever I can to change the way I'm behaving in my own life and help others in my community.
Great. Elizabeth, that's been fascinating. If people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we talked about in the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
To visions2030.studio.
Short and sweet. Love it.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Elizabeth, that's been fascinating.
Okay.
Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.